First of all, welcome to my in-laws. I can see that they're there on the screen, so that's good as well. Nice to see you, or at least to see the name. We are going to do something very different tonight. This is our fifth session, something like that, and every single time we've done something really quite different. We've looked at Pesach issues, we've looked at transgender issues, etc. We find ourselves now on Rosh Chodesh Av, at least for you, it's still Rosh Chodesh Av. This is the season to talk about Sinat Chinas. But I want to actually deconstruct what that really is and work out what people always talk on Tisha B'Av time of baseless hatred. And I think that's a completely incorrect translation and an unhelpful translation. And I'd like to try and work out with you tonight what exactly is going on, why the rabbis are so focused for this Tisha B'Av period on Sinat Chinas, what exactly that is, and what is the response. What is the way to deal with that, okay? So I'd like to work that out with you. I'd like to look at a lot of sources, talk about some really structured Bein Adam L'Chaveiro issues. Meaning, sometimes when it comes to interpersonal laws, people get very fluffy. People get very kind of, just try and be a nice person and have good midas and all that kind of stuff. Obviously, that's very important. Working on one's character development is critical. But the truth is, halachically, we'll see tonight, the structure of Bein Adam L'Chaveiro mitzvahs, of mitzvahs between people and people, is no less detailed and no less rigorous than the structure of other halachic areas. When you make when you make a cup of tea on Shabbat, you know that there's a way you do it. You do it this way, you use a kli rishon, a kli shiur, whatever you do, you do. But it's thought through and it's planned. So too, in terms of our relationships with other people, it doesn't always work this way because there's a lot of emotion as well. But in principle, we need to think it through. So what I'd like to do with you is work through this source sheet with you. It'll take us about 50 minutes. That should take us through. We'll take some questions. If you want to ask questions in the middle, please do jump in. It's a small enough group that people can go and say hi on the chat, or you can send me a question on the group chat. That's also fine. So let's have a look here at what we're trying to do. The first opening salvo is the famous source, the one that the rabbis talk about, the one that everyone stands up and quotes at this time of year. Let's look at number one. Hopefully you can see the screen. Say the rabbis in the Gemara in Yuma, Mikdash Rishon mipnei mahu charav. Why was the first temple destroyed? I'm sure you're familiar with this source. Mipnei shloisha devarim shehayu bo. There were three specific things going on in the first temple period, in the run-up to the destruction: avodah zarah, idolatry, gilui arayot, sexual licentious immorality, v'shlichat damim, and murder. Okay, the big three, which are the key kind of cardinal sins of Judaism. Mikdash Sheni, but with the second temple, says the Gemara, Shahayu Oiskim b'Torah, and it paints this picture. They learned in yeshivas in Torah, uba mitzvahs, and they did mitzvahs. Ugmilus chasadim. Look at that, Gmilus chasadim. They were kind people. They were helping each other. They were running around being good from Jews, learning Torah, doing mitzvahs, helping other people. So why on earth would that be destroyed? They weren't doing all of the things that they were doing in the first temple. Says the Gemara, because there was this Sinat Chinas, we'll translate in a minute, usually translated as baseless hatred, for reasons that I'm going to tell you. I don't think that's right. Lelamdecha, which teaches us, says the Gemara, shekula Sinat Chinas, that this Sinat Chinas is equally bad, keneged shlosha averus, as bad as these three cardinal sins: idolatry, immorality, and murder. Okay, perhaps even worse, because the first temple was destroyed, 70 years of exile, and they came back. The second temple was destroyed. They expected there to be a 70-year cycle. That's why Bar Kokhba rebelled after 70 years, because he said, right, boys, we're boys and girls, we're ready to go back now. 70 years is up. And the answer is it's not so straightforward. 70 years was not the final tally, if you like. We're now 2,000 years nearly into that exile, and it's not yet over. It's showing good signs, put it that way. It's looking better than it was about 100 years ago, but it's still going on. So Sinat Chinas, whatever it is obviously particularly bad. Let's twin with that another Gemara, which I didn't bring you here, which says that every generation in which the temple has not been rebuilt has to consider itself equally as guilty as the generation in which it was destroyed. So if you put those two things together, and we understand that Sinat Chinam was the thing that destroyed the temple, and we obviously are no better than Sinat Chinam is something that we're obviously getting wrong, significantly wrong today. Now, why do people translate Sinat Chinam as based as hatred? Because what does Sinat mean? Lisno, if you look in any standard translation, it says to hate, and Chinam means for nothing. Hating people for nothing. Well, let me break it to you, folks. Nobody hates anyone for nothing. That's just psychopathic. If you hate people for no reason at all, you need to speak to someone about that. That's not healthy. People always feel for a reason. There's always a purpose. There's always something going on. So chinam, I don't think means for no reason. And sinah, we'll see right now, sinah doesn't mean hatred. Sinah is something quite different to hatred. It's much more like rejection for reasons that we'll see right now. Sometimes people talk about, well, the antidote to Sinat Chinam is ahavat chinam. This is something you hear quite a lot. I don't know if you've heard that expression, ahavat chinam. So ahavat chinam sounds to me to translate as free love, which is not really what we're into, certainly not in the 1970s Woodstock sense. But ahavat chinam means kind of reaching out to people with no agendas, with no problems, just trying to balance the Sinat Chinam with ahavat chinam. So I don't think that quite works for reasons that we'll see soon. The way to deal with Sinat Chinam is to get rid of the Sinat Chinam. And ahava is a part of that, but it's not enough to kind of overpower it with other things, and we'll see what that means right now. So what I'd like to do with you now is just examine two halachic mitzvot in the Torah. One of them is the mitzvah of ahava, of love, or acceptance, we'll see. And one is the mitzvah of sinah, of not hating other people, or not rejecting them, as we're going to translate it. And we'll see how they work in practice, see what the practical ramifications are. And then we'll get a better understanding of what is sinah and what is sinat chinam. Okay, so look with me, please. Let's start with source 2. We're going to do these quite quickly, and but again, these are really strong halachic sources coming out of the mitzvah. So look with me at the psukim in number 2. So the verses say like this. It's in Kedoshim, in Vayikra, Leviticus chapter 19. This is the order of the verses. Number 2. Lo sisna et achicha bilvavecha. Do not reject your brother in your heart. You must give rebuke to your friend. And rebuke here could be two things, by the way. Rebuke could be the kind of normal way that we understand it, which is, I don't like the way you behave. No, you're not good enough for me. You need to do better. But that's not really the rebuke we're talking about here. Here, it's if somebody does something to you that upsets you, you're not allowed to just reject them over it. You have to you have to confront them, talk it through. We're not very good at this as English people. The Americans, I think, are much better at doing this. They're into talking everything through. It drives you a bit crazy after a while. But that's the point, is you're meant to not just keep it bottled up, but you're meant to confront them with it. Ask them, we'll see soon. Don't bear sin because of them, keeping it all bottled up. Now you've rejected them. You don't, talk it through. Loisikan, do not bear a grudge. Or take revenge rather. Loisitar, do not bear a grudge, even in case you would take revenge. Et bnei amecha, against your people. And here are the magic words: V'ahavta l'recha kamocha ani Hashem. Now you all know those. You must love your friend, sometimes translated as neighbor, as yourself. I am God. V'ahavta l'recha kamocha ani Hashem. Now I would wager that if you went around the streets of Boreham Wood asking people, where does it say in the Bible you must love your neighbor as yourself, they will probably quote from Matthew, which is true. That does say in the New Testament, you must love your neighbor, but they just ripped it out of Vayikra. They just copied it from the Chumash. That's where it says you must love your friend as yourself. What does that mean even? You must love your friend as yourself. Is love emotional? How can I love people if I don't particularly like them? Or I don't even know them? Meaning you nice people on this Zoom here. Most of you I've never met before, at least personally. Do I love you? I'm sorry to break it to you, folks. I don't love you in the same way that certainly that I love my children. I don't know you. How can I love you if I don't know you? So what is the Torah talking about here? What if people are just objectively unlikable people? I'm meant to love them? What does it mean, love them like you love yourself? You have to work on yourself, love yourself first, have high self-esteem. What does it mean, I am God? What's that got to do with anything? And there's also a grammatical problem here. Have you spotted the grammatical problem? There's a real problem in Hebrew. If you're a Hebrew person, it should have hit you right in the face in this verse before I even mentioned it. What's wrong with v'ahavta l'reyecha kamocha? What's wrong with it is...
Should be etreyecha.
Yes, v'ahavta etreyecha. How do you... Everybody knows how to say I love you in Hebrew. Ani ohev otach. Ani ohev otcha. I love you. It's a direct transitive thing. What does it mean if someone comes up to you in Hebrew at the bus station and he says, Habibi, ani ohev lach? Now, obviously the guy's a bit creepy, but he also needs to go to Ulpan. That's not Hebrew. I love to you. I love to you. You love to me. We love to each other. That's not Hebrew. So why is the Torah not speaking Hebrew? It should have said, v'ahavta et riyacha. Just like it says in the Shema, v'ahavta et Hashem Elokecha. It doesn't say v'ahavta l're Hashem Elokecha or l'Hashem Elokecha. So that's a real problem. And that is a problem because if the Chumash can't speak Hebrew, then who can? So we're going to deal with some of those issues, but just flagging them up, that is the source text that's going on here. So the first thing that Rashi brings to our attention in number 3 is this quote, quite a famous quote. There's a song that brings this in. Amar Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva said, Ze klal gadol b'Torah. This is a klal. This is not a detail in Torah. This is not just a shekel lulav kind mitzvah. Shekel lulav is very important, but you did it and you finished, and then that's it. It's not coming back till next year. You eat matzah, you're finished. V'ahavta l'recha kamocha is a klal. It comes up all the time. The Sefer HaChinuch says every time you do another mitzvah, which is between you and a person, this mitzvah kicks in or doesn't kick in. You borrow someone's mug without permission. Okay, so halachically you're a thief, and you also broke the mitzvah of v'ahavta l'recha kamocha. Whatever you do to other people, you either keep this mitzvah or you break this mitzvah as well. So this is a klal. It's not just another detail. This is something we need to take, I think, quite seriously because it comes up on a daily basis thousands of times. Every time you smile at people, you treat people properly or improperly, this mitzvah is going to kick in. Now, in order to open up exactly how it works, let's look at how it's translated. There are 2 main Aramaic translations on the Chumash. One is Unclus and the other is what's called Targum Yonatan. It's not exactly Targum Yonatan, that's really on Nach, but I'm not getting into the details of that now. Targum Unclus, and they appear on a standard Chumash. Targum Unclus gives you a straight translation, number 4. Terachem lechavrech kevatach, love your friend like yourself, Ana Hashem. Fine, exactly like the verse. However, the Targum Yonatan flips it into a negative. U'terachim lechavrech, look carefully, this is an important source. Terachim lechavrech, you must love your friend. Deman antzani lach lo tavid le. Whatever you don't like, don't do to them. That's sometimes quoted as like the golden rule. Whatever you don't like, don't do to them. Ana Hashem. Now that's interesting. What did he see in this verse that caused him to flip it? To turn it from a perfectly respectable, positive mitzvah, love your friend, into a negative mitzvah, apparently.
L'reyecha, that's what you saw.
Good. So that's one of the things exactly right. L'reyecha is a bit of a giveaway. And that's actually the Ramban, which I didn't put here on the sheet, but I think I might have put it later on. Yeah, that's the Ramban in number 9, where the Ramban in number 9 says that's the giveaway of l'reyecha, because I obviously don't need to love you. Because if I had to love you, it would have said v'ahavta et riyecha. Since it says v'ahavta le means towards you, so then I don't need to actually love you. I just need to do things for you. You'll see in the Rambam, Maimonides in a minute, it's very practical, this mitzvah. It's not actually emotional at all. Meaning, if I love you emotionally, that's even better. That's very nice. But I don't have to. I just need to do things for you and towards you. And therefore, the negative formulation is very important. Look at this Marashah. Marashah is much less well known. This Marashah is one of the commentaries on the Gemara. And the Marashah comes in here says as follows. Mikol Mokam, look with me, number 6. Amai Shina Loma, why does it change the order? Loma Balosha Shalila, and says it in a negative way. The Allah Sani, what you don't like, etc. The Targum Milishna Dekra, surely you should have translated the verse, Havalei Loma, you should have said to Rachel Chavrech, love your friend. Katargum Unclus. Why does it flip it to the negative? And he gives you an answer. It must be that the verse, the mitzvah of Ava, is actually talking about negative scenarios. Belot ta'aseh. Because it's put in the verse next to do not bear a grudge, do not take revenge. And that's why it says v'ahavta l'recha. And he brings a fascinating application. He says you have to split, and this may be a new idea to some people, between what they call the mitzvah chiyuvit and the mitzvah kiyumit. What's a mitzvah chiyuvit and kiyumit? Sometimes the mitzvah brings an obligation. Says the Marashah, in this case, the obligation of the Torah is negative, not positive. You do not have a positive Torah obligation to do acts of kindness for people, to go and help them with their shopping. Now, we'll see soon, if you do that, that's called a mitzvah kiyumit. You fulfilled this mitzvah. But the actual obligation is negative. So all the Torah is telling you is don't. Don't be insensitive. Don't be rude. Don't be whatever you wouldn't want people to be to you. That is an obligation to others. As far as what chesed you actively do, so the Torah leaves it to us to decide. We'll soon see the rabbis don't leave it to us, because if you leave it to individuals to decide what chesed to do, some will do lots, some will just sit in the house and watch Netflix because it's hard work, okay? So the rabbis came along and gave some structure, but the Torah itself is a negative formulation. And therefore, what we have here is this fascinating first presentation that the mitzvah of loving other people is actually a mitzvah not to be insensitive to them. That's the first point. Now, you know, source 7 is quite famous. I know it's irritating when rabbis say that sources are famous. It just means that they know them. But this one really is famous. I promise you, you've heard this before. 7. There was a story of a non-Jew, who came to Shammai. Shammai and Hillel were the leaders of the Jewish people towards the end of the Second Temple. He said to him, you've heard this before. Teach me the whole Torah while I'm standing on one leg. If you can do that, then I'll convert to Judaism. But you rabbis, you give sermons for hours and hours. You don't know how to stop talking. If you can give me the essence of Judaism 20 seconds, then you've got me. If you can't give me what they call an elevator pitch, I think even in England, they call it an elevator pitch. I don't think they call it a lift pitch. That doesn't quite sound the same thing. But if you can give me an elevator pitch for Judaism, just in a nutshell, what is Judaism? I'm in. So Shammai just throws him out. He says, that's ridiculous. He chucked him out with the building ruler in his hand. So either you could say he was a builder, which is a bit difficult because he was a rabbi, or you can say this is a midrashic way of saying you don't measure up. It's ridiculous. Millions of pages of Torah thought, and you want it in 20 seconds. Get out of here. Okay, good. So he left. Balifnei Hillel, says the Gemara, he came to Hillel. Hillel was terribly patient, by the way. You should know that this page of Gemara is full of accounts of ways that the people tried to get Hillel to lose his temper, and he refused to lose his temper. That's why, by the way, on campus, the safe space for students to come together is called Hillel. They call it Hillel after all these Gemaras, because Hillel was basically accepting of every Jew, no matter how much of a nudnik he was. So too Hillel on campus has to be accepting of every student, no matter how much of a nudnik they are. That's why they don't call it Shammai. Okay, good. So he came to Hillel. Geire. He converted him. Amalai said to him, same thing. What you hate, don't do to other people. And then he adds, Zohi kol Torah kula. This is the entire Torah. Wow, that's a big statement. Everything else is just really commentary. Zil Gemara. Now you can go and learn the commentary. Commentary is important. If you don't read the small print, you're going to get into trouble on the contracts. But says Hillel, there's the big print and the small print, and the big print is don't be a bad person. Don't be a nasty person. Don't be an insensitive person. If you can't do that, he says, then you don't know Judaism at all. If you're not a nice person, you cannot be a religious person. So says if you're only a nice person, then that's not enough. There's more to do, but it's necessary. It's not sufficient, but it's absolutely necessary. You have to do that. I was many years ago in a shiur. I didn't bring you the sheet, but many years ago I was in a shiur given by Professor Aumann. Professor Aumann is not a rabbi. He's a maths professor. He won the Nobel Prize for economics. I think he must be an economics professor many years ago for game theory. Now, please don't ask me what game theory is. I'm sure there are people on the Zoom who understand game theory much better than I, but he won a Nobel Prize for it, so I assume he knows what he's doing. He gave a shiur once, and he showed a very interesting thing. The Mabit. The Mabit is a 400-year-old, 500-year-old commentary. Rav Moshe of Trani, he lived in Israel about 500 years ago. He quotes a midrash. He says the midrash says that the 2 tablets of the 10 Commandments were entirely covered in writing. There were no margins, say the rabbis. It was all covered in text. Says the Mabit, okay, shkoyach, that's nice. Why do I care? Why does it even matter? Why would the rabbis even flag that? I'm never going to see the 10 Commandments. Actually, that's not true. I went to Universal Studios. Where is that place in Los Angeles where they have Charlton Heston's 10 Commandments? You know what I'm talking about? You ever been on the theater there, the Chinese theater place? Anyway, if you know what I'm talking about, you'll know. If you never saw the 10 Commandments, which you did, I know you did. I'm sure you did. Charlton Heston, it's a classic. Anyway, they've got the original 10 Commandments from the film, the 10 Commandments there. And what's fascinating is, we went to the theater, my wife and I, and they showed us them, and the guide said, here are the 10 Commandments. And someone asked, what's written on them? And they said, oh, it's all gobbledygook. And the answer is it actually wasn't. They wrote for the movie, they inscribed the 10 Commandments with Ktav Ivri, which was the ancient Paleo-Canaanite script. So actually they did write the 10 Commandments in ancient Hebrew script, not the Hebrew script that we use today for the Torah. The only thing they got wrong is they got them the wrong way around. They put the first 5 on the second half of the second 5. Anyway, that's not relevant for now. But the Professor Aumann said, the Mabit says, why do I care whether the writing was this way or that way? Doesn't matter. He says, no, it does matter. Because if you count the number of words on the first tablet, which is all between people and God, keep Shabbat, don't take God's name in vain, believe in God, etc., there are about 130 words. You can count them later. If you count the words on the second tablet, there are only about 25 words. So he said if the writing covered the entire tablet, it means the font size on the second half, which is between people, is much bigger than the font size on the first half. That's an incredible visual thing. If you think about that midrash, it's now telling us that the first visual image that the Jewish people had of the 10 Commandments was big print between people, small print between man and God, between people and God. And that's an incredibly powerful idea that's brought out from this midrash. You learn from here, by the way, every time you see a midrash which looks a bit weird or strange, you've got to think more deeply about it and work out what's going on. Okay, fine. Hello, Mark. Interesting comment. The Scots are good at it too. I can't remember what I said. It was 10 minutes ago. Don't worry about it. You could always remind me again. Fine. Sorry, I should have looked at it earlier. Okay, good. So we have our basic starting point, which is v'ahavta l'recha kamocha, is a negative obligation. It's fundamental to Torah. It's a practical obligation. Okay, says Rambam here. I'm not going to get to it in great length here, but he says it's with money, but mamoino, begufoi. The way I want to be treated with my possessions, I treat other people. The way I want to be treated with my body, I treat other people. So that's the basic mitzvah of v'ahavta l'recha kamocha. In terms of the positive obligations, look at the source in number 10 before we move on to the next mitzvah. Number 10 is the Rambam at the beginning of Hilchas Eivel, in beginning of chapter 14, I should say, and he says as follows. Again, people don't always realize this. Look at number 10 carefully. Mitzvahs asher shel divreihem, says the Rambam, it is a positive rabbinic mitzvah. It's a rabbinic mitzvah. And then he lists off the mitzvahs of chesed. Levakeh cholim, to do bikur cholim, go to a hospital. Lenachem avelim, to go to a shiva. Lahoitzi amitz, to take out the dead at a funeral. Lahachnitz akal, to bring in the kala. Lalavata orchim, to invite guests, or actually to escort them out. Lehitasek b'chol tzarchei hakvura, to do everything you need for a burial. Laseita lakesef, to put the dead body on your shoulders. Leilech lefonav, to walk in the levaya. Lispot, to give the eulogy. Lachpor, to dig the grave. Likpor, to fill it in. V'kein lesamer kala v'chatan, to give simcha at a wedding. To kala v'chatan. L'sa'adam b'kol tzarcheim, to buy the wedding presents. All of these are obligations of the rabbis. Says the Rambam, these are all chesed you do with your body, as opposed to your money. You can't just write a check always. You can't just send a check to someone lying sick in a hospital saying, here's £50, thinking of you at this difficult time. That doesn't help him. You know, he needs someone to come and sit with him. So you have to do it personally. Shein lehem shiur, and there's no specific limit to this. Now, look at what he says now. This is what people don't get. And even though these are all rabbinic obligations, remember that expression, klal? Is a klal. They are all included in v'ahavta l'recha kamocha. The Rambam saying a very important principle here, that even though the Torah obligation of chesed is negative, Don't be insensitive. Don't be rude. Don't be a bad person. The rabbi said, look, we're going to give you some structure. That's the purpose of the rabbinic law. The rabbinic law is to give structure. I'll give you another analogy. The Torah says pray. Anytime, anywhere, any words, anything you like. So the rabbis came along and said, well, people don't always know what to say. So we're going to give them structure. Shacharit, Mincha, Mariv, Kaddish, Minyan, structure. Now, of course, you can still pray, and you should still, anytime, any place, anywhere, whatever words that you like. But the structure is given by the rabbi. So too here, the rabbi set up a system that you and I call chesed. Going to a shiva, going to a funeral, going to a wedding, etc. In fact, if you ask, go out and try this in, when you see your friends, ask 100 Jewish people, is there a mitzvah in the Torah to invite guests to your home? Hospitality. 100 out of 100 will say yes. Of course. Then ask them, well, where does it say that in the Torah? Where does it say thou shalt invite guests? And the answer, of course, is it doesn't say that. So how do we know it? So I bet you, try this out. If you ask 100 people, 99 of them will start talking about Avraham Avinu. Abraham had guests, so we have guests. And you will respond to them, no. We don't learn mitzvahs from before Matan Torah, from before Sinai. The fact that Abraham did something is very nice, but that doesn't affect me directly. It doesn't make an obligation on me. I don't give my children a Brit Milah because Abraham did. I give it because the Torah later says to. So you can't learn chesed from Avraham Avinu, the mitzvah of inviting guests. You learn it from V'ahavta l'recha kamocha. So every time you invite guests to your home, you're doing the mitzvah V'ahavta l'recha kamocha. And people don't necessarily realize that. Anyway, fine, there's a lot more to say about the V'ahavta l'recha kamocha. I once went to, just a little aside, I once went to a fellow in New York for lunch. I used to travel. I say I often travel, but if I often travel, then I'd be giving you the shiur in person. But I used to often travel, and I went to a random guy that they set me up with in New York, and his hachnasat orchim was incredible, really beautiful, very, very nice. He was so attentive and so amazing in the way he treated everybody. And when everyone had gone home, I stayed back for a minute and I said to him, listen, I'm really impressed by the way that you treat all your guests. It's really something special. And he said, I want to show you something. And underneath the leaf of his table, the middle leaf of his big, long mahogany table, one of the leaves of his table had an inscription underneath it, which says, I instruct my family that this leaf of my dining room table is to be used as the lid of my coffin. And because he said, this is my mitzvah, and I want this mitzvah to come with me when I go. Very interesting. A little bit intense, I think, to know that you're sitting at the dining room table eating, gefilte fish off your own coffin. But okay, something, everybody has their thing, and that was his thing, but it really helped him to focus on the mitzvah of hachnasas orchim. It was actually very beautiful, if a little, as I say, if a little intense. Okay, fine. Ad kan v'ahavta l'recha kamocha. We're halfway through. It's 10:31. Let's move into the corollary. Lo sisna. This is a mitzvah people don't know as well, but it's the beginning of the verses we saw. Number 11. Lo sisna et achicha bilvavecha. Do not have sina, which I'm going to translate as rejection. And I'll show you why right now for your brother in your mind. Why do I translate as rejection? Because the word snu'ah, clearly in Chumash, doesn't always mean hate. Look at number 13, Leah. Vayar Hashem ki snu'ah Leah. Leah was snu'ah, as opposed to Rachel, who was ahuva. What, Leah was hated? Yaakov. The English word hate is very strong. There is a word in Hebrew for hate, and that's called sitna. Sitna is hate. Someone just said to me, it's a French minhag to be buried in a table. Wow. You learn something every day. It's a French minhag to be buried in a table. That's a bit strange, but there again, the French do have some strange customs. But it's a French Jewish minhag, or it's just a French minhag? Okay, so we've been told to see Rabbi Frand's Parsha Sefer. So look on the chat there, check it out in Rabbi Frand. Thank you very much, Mark, for that. You can check that out. Okay, good. Snua. Leah was snua. Yaakov didn't hate her. God forbid. There's no evidence from the text that he hated her. He rejected her. Rachel was the loved wife, the accepted wife. Leah was the rejected wife. And that's what Sinat means. If you look in the Orach Chaim on this mitzvah, and this really is the key, it's going to open up Sinat Chinam. It's so clever, says the Orach Chaim, that the Torah puts the word "do not reject" with achicha, with your brother. Loma, this teaches us ki hash'arat hasina, the way that you measure if you've broken this mitzvah, asher yitzaveh Hashem aleh, which God has commanded us to do, he nirgeshet be'erech ach. The question is, do you feel like this person is your brother or your sister? The shiur zeh, and what does that mean? What is that amount? Kol shi'archikeu miliboy k'tzas. If you push other people away in your mind and say, I'm not interested in them, they're not my family, they're weird, they're not my kind of Jew, that's not my religion, they're not my kind of people. If you do that, they no longer look like family, they no longer feel like family. And that's when you've broken the word, the mitzvah of lois sisna. Think about the import of that halachically. Halachically, this is why I think baseless hatred is such a bad translation. Because if the rabbi stands up and says to you, Tisha B'Av's all about baseless hatred, we should stop doing that. So what do you think? I'll tell you what I think. I think, well, I don't do that. I don't hate anybody. God forbid, why would you hate somebody? And I certainly would never do it for no reason. So if that's why the temple was destroyed, because people hated each other for no reason, then I'm all right, because I never did that, and I never will. Why would I ever hate someone for no reason? So it can't be that. Because the Gemara is saying that the reason there is no temple is because we're still doing this. So what are we doing? If it's not hating for no reason, the answer is what the Orach Chaim said. Sinat Chinam means rejecting. We'll see what the Chinam means in a minute. But the Sinat bit is rejecting other Jewish people because they're not your kind of Jew. Because they don't feel like your family. And this is not some fluffy kind of let's all sit on the floor and sing kumbaya and be one big family. This is a real halachic obligation. If you ever look at another Jew from another community and think, okay, fine, you know something, I'm tolerant, live and let live, but that's not my kind of person, then that person broke the Torah in that sense. That's a breach of this mitzvah. And this is actually very hard now. Now you can see what Sinat Chinam really is. And we'll see at the end, that's what they were doing at the second temple. Yes, they were keeping mitzvahs, they were learning Torah, they were doing chesed, but not to the other kind, not to the other crowd. There's the shul I don't go to because they're all weird in that shul. They're all fanatics, or they're all heretics. They're not my kind of Jew. That's the problem. Because you don't have to be the same as everybody else, and you don't have to agree with everybody else. You can say that they're totally wrong. I disagree fundamentally with how they've interpreted this or lived their life or whatever, but you can never reject them. Come on, you disagree with siblings as well. Siblings always agree? No, siblings fight. Siblings disagree. But siblings are siblings at the end of the day. And that's how we're meant to feel about other Jewish people. This I think is, for me anyway, when I first learned this, was a real revelation. And this is the mitzvah, as I say, of sin'ah, that you're not allowed to feel that for another Jewish person. Fine. By the way, this is really applicable in a person's mind. If a person actually expresses that, the Rambam is very clear on this, 16, and this is how the halacha is ruled in 17 Mishnah Brura, that if a person actually goes up to another Jew and says, you know something, I don't like you, I think you're outrageous or whatever, so good, you're not allowed to do that. That's also prohibited for different reasons, but then you're not doing this particular prohibition. This is keeping it in your mind, rejecting someone thinking, I don't want anything to do with you, you're not my kind of person. So that is the prohibition of lois sisna, which is the corollary, if you like, of v'ahavta l'recha kamocha. Fine. So what is sinat chinam? What is this issue of for no reason? Well, there's never a reason to reject someone, is there? So the answer is, we'll see, maybe there is, and we'll see what this means. Because people might turn around and say, well, come on, there are people who behave badly. I don't have to accept people who behave badly. They're not doing what they should do. And this is where we enter this murky world of, is there someone that you're meant to be having sinah for out there? Have a look here in the Gemara in Pesachim, number 18. Says the Gemara here as follows: Shlosh HaKadosh Baruch Hu Sonam. There are three kinds of people that God, as it were, rejects. So one of them is the following: if you see something bad that your friend did, let's give an example. Let's say your friend went into a shop and stole something. Okay? So no, you're not just your friend. Someone, you saw another Jew walk into a shop and steal something, shoplifting. And it's clear. There's no doubt about it. They're clearly a thief. But then you go and tell on your own to the authorities as one witness. That doesn't help anybody. Ki had the Tuvia chata. Okay, there was a case, says Gemara, that Tuvia was the thief. Let's say Tuvia did the prohibition. And then this other guy went on his own. Rav Papa and told Rav Papa, I saw this other fellow thieving. So they gave lashes to the guy who came and gave the report. So he said, well, second. Amalei says to the rabbi, Tuvia chata, he steals, v'zigud mingud, and I get lashes? He should get lashes. He's the thief, not me. I'm trying to do the right thing here. Amalei said to him, no, it's right that you get lashes. You can never have one witness. One witness is nothing. You're just giving testimony on your own. You're just saying lashon hara. You're just slandering the guy. What can I do? If you have a second witness, well, now we're talking. Now we have what to do. But if you have one witness, you're just speaking lashon hara. So fine. So you can't go and report somebody if there's one witness. So what can you do? I saw somebody stealing. What am I meant to think? So here the Gemara says something unexpected. Amar Shmuel bar Yitzchak, Amar Rav, mutzer lisnoisai. You're allowed to have sinner for the guy. As we translate it, reject him. Of course you can't hate him. You're allowed to reject him. And he brings a pasuk. Kitira chamor sonacha. Remember this verse in the Torah? If you see the donkey of someone that you have sinner for, roived tachat masa. We're going to come back to that in a minute. This person in the Torah that's saying that if you have sinner for this person, you nevertheless have to go and help them unload the donkey, etc. Who is this person that you have sinner for? Says the Gemara, my son, it was this person. The chazi ba'iyu dvar, someone that you know behaves badly. Says the Gemara finally here, Amar Rav Nachman, Rav Yitzchak Amar, mitzvah lisnaisai. There's actually a mitzvah to feel rejection for that person. Those who fear Hashem hate evil. Okay? And the Rambam rules that way. Number 19, Hasoinish sheneba b'Torah. When the Torah talks about a soines, someone that you have sinner for, who Yisrael? This is a Jew, not a non-Jew. How could it be that a Jew would have sinner for another Jew? Because of Omer, doesn't the pasuk say, so he's asking this question, how can there be a case where the Torah authorizes rejecting someone? It just told me not to. Amar Chacham, and the rabbi said, this is a person that you see behaving badly, and you warn them, important point, and they're not interested, they say, go away, none of your business. There's a mitzvah to reject them, till they do tshuva, v'yachzir mirishai. Okay? So now it sounds like there's a whole group of people that I'm allowed to have zealous rejection of. There's all those bad people out there, the people who are doing averos. So I'm the tzaddik. The Torah says if I'm not doing the averos and they are, I'm allowed to reject them. I'm allowed to do that. So fine. So maybe there are people who you are allowed to reject. Is that really the case? So the answer to that question is it's really not straightforward. And this is where the Chinam bit comes into Sinat Chinam. Because what seems to be the case here so far is the Torah says you're not allowed to reject another Jew. They have to be like a sibling. But on the other hand, the Torah said, but there are some people who you are allowed to. The people who do bad stuff. Okay? A Rasha. So not a Rasha like the whole persona is bad, but they did an Aveira. Oh, you're allowed to reject them. So the Rambam paskin that way we saw, and yet if you look in the Rambam's account of the 13 principles of faith, he says something that seems to directly contradict it. Look at number 21. How are we meant to treat other Jews who do Averas, who don't keep the Torah, which of course is ourselves, because who keeps every mitzvah? Nobody keeps every mitzvah. Every single person does stuff wrong. But how are we meant to relate to other people who do stuff wrong? Maybe worse stuff than we do, maybe not, whatever. It says the Rambam, as long as they accept all the 13 principles, and they really believe in it, and I'm not going now through what all the 13 principles are, and whether people really get them right or wrong. Let's leave that for another shit. Very interesting though. As long as they believe the 13 principles of faith, says the Rambam, they are a Jew. And you have a mitzvah to love them, to look after them. Everything that God told us to do for each other, from love, the achva, and brotherhood. Afilu asamashiochelios min averas, and it doesn't matter if they do averas. It doesn't matter if they eat treif. It doesn't matter if they don't keep Shabbos. It doesn't matter if whatever they do. I mean, there are limits. If they're a heretic, but who's a heretic? I don't think you probably know many heretics, because I certainly don't know many. Even if they break mitzvahs in the Torah, it doesn't make any difference. They have a yetzer hara, they have an inclination to that. Shkoyach, so do you, so do I, so does everybody. You can't reject somebody for that because they did an aveira, because they did something wrong. So 1 second, now this is getting confusing, because the Torah just told me, the Gemara just told me, the Rambam just told me in the halacha that if I see another Jew doing an aveira, I'm allowed to have sinah for them. And now the Rambam turns around and says, but of course, if a Jew does an aveira, you've got to love them. You've got to help them. It's only if they're a heretic and they fall off the edge, which let's assume is very few people. So which is it? And the answer, of course, is it's both. And herein lies the key as to what is Sinat Chinas. Look at this. Look at how we'll see it here in the mitzvah here. What's the thing with the donkey? So number 22, if you see the donkey of someone who you reject, and we know who that is, someone who behaves badly, just said before, tachat masa on their, and the load is weighing them down, and you just look the other way. No, you must help them. You must go and help this donkey and the person. So let me ask you a question. If you've got a choice between someone you like and someone you reject, which is the one you should give preference to? There's two guys with a donkey. One is a guy who is a sonner, who behaves badly and you feel, I don't like them, okay? And his donkey needs unloading. And the other is a guy who's your best friend and his donkey needs unloading. Which one do you run to? Says the Torah, the sonner. You have to go to the one who you don't like. Okay, fine. What if it's a donkey that needs loading or a donkey that needs unloading? There are two mitzvahs, prika and te'ina. Okay, te'ina means you have to load the guy up. Prika means you have to unload the guy. If you have two donkeys, one needs loading and one needs unloading, which takes precedence? You can only do one. The answer is, which is more important, loading or unloading? Come on, take a guess.
Loading.
No.
He's got to get on with his work.
Good, he's got to get on with his work. But if you
prika, so he'll get somehow or other he'll unload his donkey. Once he's got there, he's already finished his task.
But there's another angle.
I would rather help somebody on his way.
Good, but there's another angle here. What about the poor old donkey? Yeah, when you help unload the donkey, you're doing the added mitzvah of removing pain to an animal.
Okay, but now we're talking about a car, aren't we? We're not talking about donkeys. So let's talk about a car.
Oh, good. So with a car, you're probably right, because with a car, the car doesn't care one way or the other, and therefore you're best off. So when you were dealing with donkeys, so the Gemara, of course, is now going to set you up for a classic Talmudic question. Okay, fine. So listen, if there's a choice between a guy that I like and a guy that I don't like, I have to run to the guy that I don't like. If there's a choice between loading and unloading, I have to go for the unloading. Says the Gemara number 23, Tashma. I have lifrate, but what if the guy you like is unloading, and the guy you don't like is loading? And now you're really stuck, because on the one hand, I have to help the guy that I don't like. On the other hand, I have to help the guy who's unloading, and now they're like, I'm stuck. Which really takes precedence? Don't you love Gemara? They think of these questions. Says the Gemara, mitzvah b'soiner. There's a mitzvah to go to the guy that you don't like, kedei lachof es yitzray, to beat down your yetzer hara, yeah, to stop yourself from being that kind of person. So Tosfos asks a fantastic question. What do you mean yetzer hara? You're allowed to reject the guy. That's the whole point. This guy is the guy who you saw shoplifting yesterday. The Torah gives me righteous sinah. I'm allowed to have sinah. Why am I trying to overcome my evil inclination? It's a good inclination. I'm meant to be rejecting him. Look what Tosfos says, and really beautifully says the following. Medieval commentary here. In time, he quotes this Gemara. I have to help the guy who's I don't like. Mitzvah b'soiner, kedei lachof es yitzro. He asked the question I just asked. Why are you overcoming your evil inclination? Shiur. Kevin the mitzvah listener. Didn't the Torah say you're allowed to reject the guy? He says, no, listen. It's not how it works in real life, he says. Yeshlam, the answer is the following. Kivan dehu soiner, if you reject the other guy for strong, good religious reasons, gam chaveru soiner oiso, he rejects you back, but not for good reasons. Why not? As it says in Mishlei, Kamaim hapanim lapanim ken leiv ha'adam la'adam. Whatever you do for other people, they'll just reflect back at you. Okay? And now that he hates you back for all the wrong reasons, now you'll hate him really. Sinna Gemura. Now there's nothing righteous at all going on here. It's just two people who basically hate each other. That's why, and that's V'shai Kvias Yetzer. Because the problem is, he says, that sinna, which in theory is legitimate for certain people, can become sinna gemura. What's sinna gemura? It's when it's personal. That's the point. That's what Sinat Chinas is rejecting someone for a personal reason. That you're never, ever allowed to do. Never allowed to do. Even if they're a Rasha, even if they're behaving badly, which we'll see soon, nobody is today, basically. Even if they were, that's not something that you're allowed to do on a personal basis. In fact, on a personal basis, you still have to have the ahava, and that's what the Rambam was saying before. The same individual that I have a mitzvah of ahava, I also have a mitzvah of sinna. And look how the Rav Kook says it, number 25. Rav Kook says, Rav Goren. Rav Goren was obviously a Talmud of Rav Kook and the chief rabbi of Israel. He quotes Rav Kook here, number 25. Perish Divrein Gilali, the explanation, Gilali Agon Yisrael V'Kol Shamarana Rav Kook. Rav Kook told me this, Lifnei Esrim Shana, 20 years before. This was the 50s, so that was the 30s. Even people who do Averas, the Torah never allowed the Issa of rejecting someone, you're not my sibling. The Loi Patra Atanim in mitzvahs v'ahavta l'reich. It never released us from the mitzvah to love that person. Gam klapav. It's the classic love the sinner, hate the sin. And that's not a Catholic idea. It's a Jewish idea. That even if I'm allowed to have sinna for the avera, for the sin, for the thing he did wrong, I'm never allowed to reject the person as an individual. Never. And if I do, that's called Sinat Chinam. That's sinna for no legitimate reason. I have to be able to treat what they did and who they are as two different people. But then it gets even more specific, which is who really is the person who does an avera. I've got the ability to say I see other people who do averas. The Chazon Ish jumps in and says, I'm not going to have time to go through all of it now, but the Chazon Ish basically jumps in and says, there is no Jew now who's considered to have done an Avera on purpose. Why not? Because the Rambam was very clear. It has to be someone that you gave hatra. You have to give them a warning. You have to give them tochacha. And nobody's able to do that now. So it says the Chazon Ish, and by the way, the Chazon Ish was not known to be a kind of touchy-feely, love everybody type. Although in this he clearly was, that he said there is no Jew out there today that you can turn around and say with your hand on your heart that they did this on purpose, that they understood everything about it and I'd given them the right information. No, and therefore even when it comes to the Aveira today, a person is never allowed to have that sense of sinna, let alone the individual themselves, which even when they did do an Aveira, they were never allowed to do. Okay, so to summarize, and then we'll finish with two pieces from the Netziv, which will, I think, bring us back to the BES Hamikdash. What have we seen in summary? Number one, there is a mitzvah v'ahavta l'recha kamocha, which means I am not allowed to be insensitive to other Jewish people, maybe even non-Jewish people as well. I mean, certainly a person should never be insensitive, but there may be an obligation across, not just for Jewish people. The mitzvah of chesed comes as a rabbinic structure on top of that. We saw that. The mitzvah of loisisna means anytime I reject another Jew in a way that I feel you're not my kind of person, you're not my sibling anymore, that's already a breach. What about a Jew who does an Aveira? Even if I know they definitely did something wrong, even if they're definitely a Rasha in that respect, I'm never allowed to hate them or reject them. I'm only allowed to reject what they did. And today, says the Chazon Ish, I'm not even allowed to reject what they did, because I cannot hand on heart say that they did it on purpose, in the sense that the Torah requires you to have a real understanding of what you did before you're considered to do it on purpose. So what comes out from all of this is that Sinat Chinam, there's no room for any of this. There's no room for rejection of anybody. There's no room for any kind of personal rejection. And that was the problem in the Mikdash. I want to show you two pieces by the Netziv. The Netziv lived in the 19th century. He was the Rosh Yeshiva of Volozhin. And he writes the following two pieces. Let's look with me in the last piece and the last two pieces, and we'll and we'll take questions and call it a day. It's a bit late here, I should say. Number 27. The ha'inyan nitbai b'shirat ha'azinu. When we read ha'azinu, this was my bar mitzvah pasha, so I do remember a bit about it. Ala posuk hatzur tamim pa'alo. We say God is the rock who is perfect, tzaddik v'yasharhu. God is tzaddik, he's right, he's just, and he's straight. What does that mean? Says the Netziv, Shevach yashar hu nema lahatzdik din HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We justify the judgment of God, b'churban b'sheni, in the destruction of the second temple. It was a fair thing to do. Upirashnu, what do I mean? He says, Shehayut tzadikim. They were tzadikim, like the Gemara said. Chasidim. They were great. They did chesed. Omle Torah. They used to learn Torah. They were the frumest people you can imagine. Achloi hayu yisharim, but they weren't straight. They didn't have yashras. They didn't treat people in the way they should have done. Ba'alichas olam, in the way they lived in the world. Okay, therefore, mipnei sinat chinam shebelivam, they rejected people personally in their minds. Anyone who was behaving in their Jewish life in a way that didn't particularly appeal to them, B'yirat Hashem, on whatever they thought that the person should be doing, Shehud Stuki, they labeled them a Tzeduki, a Sadducee, V'apikoros, a heretic, because it was easy for them to reject people like that. And that led to some terrible, terrible murder, destruction, but derech haflagi, in a very extreme way. Even, by the way, Beit Shammai, Beit Hillel, which is meant to be machloket l'shem shamayim, it all got horribly dirty. And all the terrible things that shecharav habayis, until the temple was destroyed. God is straight. And then look at this line. It's almost like a scary line. God cannot bear tzadikim like this. People who act for him, but they reject other Jews. That's not called tzaddikim. That's even worse in a sense. They have to go act straight. And it doesn't matter if they think they're doing it for the sake of heaven. Everybody thinks they've got God on their side. Says the Netziv, it doesn't help. Zegerim churban, it just causes churban, destruction, abriya, of people, v'harisas yishuv haaretz, and it destroyed Eretz Yisrael. And in the last piece that I want to show you, in fact, maybe I'll just read the last line of it. In the 19th century, there was a call to reject Jews who didn't follow the party line. There was in the paper, there was a whole controversy about it, and they said reject these Jews, and he said, God forbid, we can't reject people in this way. He says, and he basically goes through the same idea. I'm not going to have time to read it now. And he says, this is exactly what happened in the Churban Habayis, that each one saw somebody else and said, as far as I'm concerned, you're not my kind of Jew. Okay. Let's look at the bits underlined here. They looked at other people who were Jewish. Someone else is not my kind of Jew. He said he's a heretic. He distanced from them. And then they were able to hunt each other down. And that destroyed the Jewish people. And look what he says at the end. And this could happen again, even if we got back to Eretz Yisrael. He wrote this probably in the 1850s, 60s. The Netziv was an early supporter of religious Zionism, of Chibat Zion. Before secular Zionism even raised its head, religious Zionism began in the 1860s, 70s. The Netziv says it's all very well wanting to build your own yeshuv in Israel. But if you don't sort out the problem of people rejecting each other, you're just going to have the same thing happen all over again. It won't help that you've got a state, a government. It won't help if you can't deal with the fundamental issue. Okay, so I think the answer here is pretty clear, that it's not a question of balancing this with avat chinam and running and hugging each other. I don't have to go and hug anybody, which is just as well, because as I said, I'm English, I need to have my personal space even before Corona, yeah? But I'm not allowed to reject people. It's as simple as that, just because they're not my kind of people. And certainly not today, when nobody is able to say that they even did something wrong, because did they even understand the implications? I think this halach, the halach is very clear on this. And people who are self-righteous in this respect have to explain to me why they're allowed to be that way based on everything we've learned today. Okay, I've spoken a lot. I'm happy to hear questions. Yes, Jonathan.
I put a question actually in the chat.
Sorry, I
So
didn't see.
I've just done it. I've just written the question.
Can I read it, Jack? Can I read it, or do you
Yes,
want me
of course you can read it. Yes.
Good. I have a question you've written. How are Orthodox Jews required to behave towards Reform and liberal Jews? Heretics, you say. Well, that was your words. Especially when you see Orthodox rabbis rejecting dialogue with these heretics. Okay, so Orthodox rabbis have to make policy decisions for communities. That's rather different to how we treat each other personally. They have to act not just on an individual basis, but for what is best for the community as a whole. Okay, and even on that, by the way, there are many different opinions. There are many rabbis, Orthodox rabbis, that say we should sit and discuss areas that are common interest areas with all communities, issues of anti-Semitism, of Israel, etc. There's no point sitting and discussing theology. Where will it get us? I don't need to do that. It's not helpful. So that's the rabbis who have their, if you like, their policy issues to deal with. But in terms of you and me, why would that make any difference that someone went to a liberal or reform shul? It makes no difference at all. I don't think there's a single person who would say that someone who today goes to a reform shul is a heretic. God forbid. Why would you say that? They go to a reform shul because that's
well, I put that in inverted commas because they are rejected by the Orthodox establishment, aren't they? So you're saying that's a political decision rather than...
I don't think it's political. I think that the reform movement is legitimately rejected as an expression of authentic Judaism, which it says it is legitimately rejected by the Orthodox world because they don't have to agree on that. They're allowed to reject other people's opinions. But when it comes to individuals, I don't think that, I can't imagine an Orthodox rabbi not wanting to, sit and drink a glass of wine with a Reform rabbi. I mean, I don't know. I mean, maybe they would or maybe they wouldn't. I don't know. There's lots of people in this world. I can't imagine people who wouldn't do that. Yes. But I don't think that there's a justification for that. But I don't think that the Orthodox establishment should turn around and say the Reform establishment is an authentic expression of Judaism. It's not. We can agree to disagree on that. That's fine. But it's not personal.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions? Are we doing well? Okay. Well, I'm going to let you folks go because we've been talking for a long time. Thank you very much for your attention. I really appreciate it. We will meet again, Be'ezrat Hashem. Some stage, Rabbi Chappell will remind me what we agreed August, September, but to be in touch with anybody. So have a great evening and we'll see you soon. All the best.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Wonderful share. Shkoyach.